Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, the web briefing on 2018 Traffic Signal Benchmarking Self-Assessment Survey. My name is Nilu Parvinashtiani, and I will help facilitate today's webinar. This webinar is hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, NOCO. At NOCO, we offer a variety of resources to support the TISMO community. So if you look at the right side of your screen right now in the useful links pane, we shared the NOCO's Knowledge Center link with you to connect you with the entire collection of NOCO and TISMO resources. Also, you can see the subscription link to our newsletter if you're interested to hear major TISMO announcement and our bi-weekly newsletter. Before I hand it to Doug to start us off with this web briefing, I would like to cover a few webinar logistics. I am recording this webinar right now, and the webinar recording and the slides will be shared with you through a post-webinar email within 1 to 2 days. This will be also available through our website in the on-demand learning section. Also, in terms of questions, please type your questions in the question pod anytime during this web briefing. At the end of the webinar, I'll go over those questions and read them out loud, and our presenters will answer each of your questions. All the participants' line should be muted. If you're not muted, please mute yourself. We will have Doug and Eddie present and talk on this web briefing. So I guess that is all I have, and with that I would like to hand it over to Doug to start us off with the webinar.
Okay, welcome and thank you. My name is Doug Noble. I work here at the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and myself and Eddie Curtis from the Federal Highway Resource Center in Atlanta and the RTL Management Program will be presenting information on the 2018 Traffic Signal Benchmarking Self-Assessment. And I will go on ahead with our presentation here. So part of this is, on background, this is really the grandson of the first traffic signal report cards that came out in 05, 07, and 2012. So what we're doing here is a quick outline, talk about why we're assessing traffic signal programs, some history, some of the assumptions that go into the self-assessment, and Eddie will be talking about some of the underlying concepts that we'll be looking at within the self-assessment itself in terms of objectives and performance-based management, traffic signal program management and organizational capacity, and a framework on goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics. And then I'll do a brief walkthrough of the self-assessment website and the assessment itself. So why are we assessing traffic signal programs? The goal, overarching goal, is to improve mobility, safety, and efficiency, and to reduce congestion. The objective is really to take a look at performance-based management in design, operations, and maintenance of traffic signal systems. And the strategy with the self-assessment and the subsequent state of the practice report is really to benchmark signal infrastructure, what our current extent and level of assets are, which is integral to making investment decisions, and further capturing for management, operations, and maintenance, and design as well, organizational workforce trends, technology implementation, and current practices. And the value of this for the different agencies is to encourage improvements in practice to benefit the traveling public through proactive management and consistent application of system and organizational reliability. And ultimately, that's the end game here, is to make things better for the traveling public by enabling organizations to actually perform their work well. So some brief history from the 2012 traffic signal report card, and some of these numbers have obviously gone up with the changes in economy. Around the country, we have 323,000 traffic signals. Rough estimate of the infrastructure assets value is almost $86 billion. Annual operating and maintenance program costs, $1.2 billion. This is across all agencies. Annual capital programs for construction, $859 million. Again, this was information gathered in the 2012 traffic signal report card. And with that, I will pass it off to Eddie Curtis from the Resource Center to go through some of the underlying assumptions for the self-assessment.
Thanks, Doug. Again, this is Eddie Curtis with the Federal Highway Administration. And I'm just going to touch on some of the assumptions. And this is, I like that Doug characterized the prior report cards, the 05, 7, and 11 report cards as sort of the grandparent of this current effort. And those prior report cards were really based on two key assumptions. One was sort of a prototype set of infrastructure, and on the left there is what we characterize as, say, traffic signal systems, infrastructure, systems, and technology. So there's, your basic intersection control, detection, communication, and then higher level system control. But the core assumption of the prior report card is that most signal systems did have some sort of central management capability. And the reality is that that capability should be based on a need or a set of objectives, which I'll get into in a minute. And then the other core assumption was really in how organizations that manage and operate, maintain traffic signal systems, design planning, that they tended to follow this linear process. And this, what I'm this diagram on the right is really the typical traffic signal timing process. So it started with a trigger event, then that was followed by some signal timing, data collection, design, installation, fine-tuning, and then it was sort of a stop, wait for the next project. So a very project-oriented process. What we did back in 2009, Federal Highway, is we helped a number of organizations review their traffic signal programs, and we observed that agencies that, well, let me say it a different way. The success that agencies had with their traffic signal programs was really not an outcome of the level of resources. And what we found is that there were sort of these four key archetypes that we looked at, and they had some commonalities among them. And they were a clear understanding of what objectives were trying to be achieved, commitment to staff development, systems and technology that was consistent, or should I say using their systems and technology in a way that was consistent with their workforce and staffing and expertise. And then there were a few others, but what we've done over time is we've characterized what makes agencies successful into this, what we call the GCOST process. And so it's starting with looking at goals, evaluating context, developing a set of objectives, and then compatible performance measures to tell you if those objectives are being achieved, and then also developing a set of strategies followed by tactics. And this whole thing comes full circle so that you can identify whether or not you're achieving the organization's goal. And so that's what we call this GCOST process. And so this is really part and parcel to how we're beginning to look at traffic signal programs. And one of the outcomes of the first report card was this, I think it was a figure, something like $635 million could update all of the traffic signal controllers nationally. And that sort of also got into this discussion about the need for additional resources. And so the way that you access resources is to work through the transportation planning process. And the transportation planning process starts out with these high-level regional goals and objectives. Then there might be a set of operations objectives. And then they would look to not just signal systems, but ITS in general, so travel information systems, work zones, freeway systems. But it was asking, how can we achieve our regional objectives with the strategies that might be implemented on the ITS side? And so what all this says is it's important to be able to connect what you do on a day-to-day basis to a core set of not just agency goals, but maybe even regional or statewide goals to be more successful in accessing resources. And so what that did is it helped us to take the GCOST matrix. We looked at what's happening in the planning process, and what we did is we formulated a model traffic signal program. And so this is effectively that model. And you can see what's really operative to this model is right in the center. It's the objectives. And those are the same objectives that came out of the GCOS process. And so what this says is that everything that the traffic signal program undertakes should be oriented towards attainment of some objective. Otherwise, why is that activity important? How can we demonstrate its value if we can't connect it to objectives? And so over time, what we've done, if I deconstruct this traffic signal program matrix, going back to my earlier comment about connecting this to the GCOS matrix, so we're saying is, so systems and technology, so what level of control you have at the intersection, detector configurations, communications, whether it's back to a central system or if it's, connecting intersections to attain coordination, and then even whether or not you connect those systems to a central system should all be geared towards attainment of some objective. Similarly, everything that happens, so the task or the business processes that are being undertaken on a day-to-day basis in design, operations, and maintenance, those too should be geared towards attainment of objectives. Same thing with workforce. So what training should our staff have? What knowledge, skills, and abilities should we invest in? What should the job descriptions look like? And then likewise in management administration. And management administration is demonstrated in other report cards to be an area that, significant gap. But this gets into setting a direction for the program, so articulating the objectives themselves, and then sharing that with the entire traffic signal program, internal and external to the program, asset management, resource allocation and budgeting, and then reporting performance measures are all things that lie in management and administration. And then if we were going to just show you how this framework works, if I started with a set of performance measures, it's important to be able to meaningfully describe how you're attaining objectives. And so here's a set of performance measures that might be used to describe different traffic signal timing activities. But these are examples of, say, operations activities. There are also a set of measures that would be used to evaluate other aspects of the program in terms of maintenance, in terms of design. But then if I was to show you the goals, so the typical goals that you see in many organizations are things like mobility, state-of-good repair, quality customer service, fiscal responsibility. Context really lies in 4 core areas. You have the demand on the network, so and that's modal. So is it vehicle demand? Is it pedestrian, transit? And then what are the levels? Light, moderate, heavy, oversaturated, congested. The network configuration. So are we in a central business district? Is it an arterial grid? Is it a linear arterial? Is it a freeway interchange? And then in terms of user mix, so vehicle, peds, bikes, and then organizational capability. And that goes back to the traffic signal program model to talk about how effectively is the organization undertaking its business processes, workforce, and systems and technology activities. But we put all these things together with a set of objectives. And one of the outcomes of doing this is it gives us the ability to articulate in a meaningful way how the activities that are undertaken every day, so the strategies and the tactics, are day-to-day activities and methods. So let's say we had a goal of mobility and we were interested in a particular part of the network, so say linear arterials under moderate traffic demand, and we're saying maybe focused on vehicles. The objective that would fall out of that would be smooth flow. So that's basically a coordination or progression related objective that's pretty common in signal systems. And then the performance measures that we might use could be arrivals on red or arrivals on green, and we could use a Purdue coordination diagram to observe that visually. But the whole point of this is that we're able to weave a story together that says, here's why we design intersections the way that we do. Why do we monitor and have the type of signal system that we have in place? And then just to walk through another example, if we were to use safety as a goal, similarly we would say safety is a goal that's important under all contexts. So it doesn't matter what the traffic demand, network configuration, or user mix is. The objective is fundamental to all traffic signals, so safe transfer of right-of-way. and then we might use yellow and red actuations. But the whole point of this is, how do we weave together a story that really says, what do we do on a day-to-day basis? And this is really at the core of objectives and performance-based management of infrastructure. And I think with that, I'm going to hand it back to Doug, and he'll talk through what are we covering under the benchmarking part, and then what are we getting into with the organizational management component, and then we'll do a walkthrough.
This is going to be a very brief overview. So in the benchmarking, the actual self-assessment, we're covering 4 core areas in terms of benchmarking of what different people have in terms of their systems infrastructure. So systems and technology, different business processes that you may engage in, workforce, management administration in terms of roles, culture, collaboration, and budgeting. And then there's an organizational assessment that goes through 4 levels of capability maturity. And so with that, I was going to walk through the website real briefly and show you where we are with that. And I'm sharing my screen here. So this is the traffic signal benchmarking website's design, kind of an open platform. The first area up on the top are just some key areas of practice. The benchmarking, hello, not actually moving, okay. Benchmarking area, then we talk about some resources that one could use here in terms of the different areas of management, workforce systems, and business processes. The state of the practice is really where we'll end up with the state of the practice report and outcomes in here. Resources I already mentioned, and then there's an archive that we've established for the material from the previous signal report cards for background. So with regards to the assessment, there's a brief intro here in terms of how to conduct the assessment for your agency, in terms of how to put together a small group exercise. And then to take the assessment, all you do is you click the Begin Self-Assessment button. To make this go a little quicker, I've already started, and that button will take you to a registration page. And part of the reason we ask you to register and put a password in is for 2 reasons. First of all, if you stop your survey in progress, you can come back to the survey and log back in and complete it. Secondly, if you decide to print out the results later, not just as after you've completed the survey, you can also log back in and print those results. So with that, this is basic information. You create a username. It can be your actual name or not. A password, longer security preferred. And then place your name, title, agency, type of agency, your email, city and state. This will give us some demographic information in terms of where you are, what type of agency, to do some mapping around the country. And then with that, it goes into the meat of the self-assessment in terms of benchmarking. So it first of all talks about number of employees, and you can fill this in. It defaults to 0, but you type a number in. If you have other types of employees, you can place a number in here, and it will ask you to fill out a blank here in terms of what they are. If you have there are some questions which are going to be optional. It'll say, if you have information, fill these in terms of what your salary ranges are. Again, if you have it. There's some other questions that are yes/no questions, which have toggles here, which I'm just going to select some options here. And some questions about how you performed work for your agency. I'm just going to select these. If you don't select an answer to a question that's required, it will give you an error message and prompt you for that information, so we'll test that down at the bottom here. And I'm just clicking through these. You can fill in these blanks on your own. I'm just giving this to you as an example, just to go through numbers. So these are all different questions. Some of these are very similar to questions that were in the previous report card. So as an example, I'm going to not fill this one out for question 6 and click next. And it says, please check a box if you want to proceed. So it gives you an error if you want to go ahead and work on some of these questions that are required And this goes through different areas. What I'm going to do is skip through this a little bit to get to questions further down on the self-assessment for the organizational capability piece. So if you bear with me, I'm just going to pre-populate some of these things with random numbers, but you get the idea. One thing that's dropped down here for this question 9, there's a number of questions like this where you can either put in the number of actual items you have or a percentage of your system. So it gives you the option of doing either. If you don't know, there are some check boxes here. Now question 10, if you answer yes, it will open up some other boxes for you to complete here. You know, if you answered yes or you answered no, it will not populate those boxes. So with that, I'm trying to figure out how to get to the quickest way to the end of this.
So Doug, while you're doing that, I'm going to just make a general comment.
The other piece here.
Can you hear me?
Yep, should be on.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ed.
What I was going to mention is that probably I didn't mention this, the big difference between this report card and prior report cards is that this one has a primary focus on benchmarking, which is counting stuff, you know, so how many staff, how many signals do you have, type of infrastructure, different processes that are in place. And then there's also an organizational component, which I think Doug is trying to get down to. And that's just a very general look to say, you know, going back to my traffic signal program model, is how does the agency's business processes, workforce, systems and technology, you know, how do those program areas, how do they support the organization's objectives and have those objectives been articulated? And that's just a real quick 5-minute assessment that you go through. Prior report cards had more of an emphasis on the organizational assessment component and maybe not so much on the infrastructure itself. So this is really looking primarily at benchmarking. So let's talk about the stuff that you have and get a more accurate assessment of what that looks like on a national scale.
Unfortunately, this requires me to pre-populate everything to get down to the section I want, which will be pretty quick here because I'm almost done with this. All right.
Doug's demonstrating how quickly you can complete the survey.
Yes, I am. Everybody else on there is laughing with me, I'm sure. No. But as you can see, that all this is click boxes and questions primarily. And I don't want to spoil the survey for everybody else as they go through this, so I'm not really concentrating on the specific questions through this. But you'll be able to go through this. We get down here. So, all right. So now we're down at the Traffic Signal Program Organizational Assessment, and this goes into the capability items that Eddie was mentioning. So Eddie, do you want to talk through each of the levels, and then I'll go through one example?
Yeah, so I mean the key to this is to ask the question, how well is the organization's program areas supporting its objectives? So level 1 would say that it's ad hoc. That means the objectives are not well defined, and subsequently all the activities tend to be ad hoc, not very focused. Level 2, the objectives have been articulated. They may or may not be written down, but everyone's aware of what they are. So at least everyone knows what the direction, what the objectives are, and so the business processes and some level of performance measurement is happening relative to those objectives. At level 3, the objectives and strategies are well defined. That means they definitely have been written down, shared in some sort of a traffic signal management plan or a strategic plan of some sort, and a set of measures has been developed to identify how effectively each of the program areas is supporting attainment of those objectives. And then level 4 gets to manage. So we have all of the objectives, we have a set of performance measures, but then at the same time we have processes in place that are evaluating, how effective is the systems and technology? Is it able to attain objectives? Do we need to upgrade controllers? Similarly for workforce, do our staff have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to help them perform their jobs adequately, and do we have the budget identified to improve their capabilities should those needs be identified as an outcome of this ongoing sort of assessment and evaluation that the organization does. And so that's really the 4 levels.
Yeah, and then as you go through this, there'll be one for each of these different program areas we talked about. So for example, systems and technology, and it describes what is within systems technology for each of the four levels, and simply choose the button which best corresponds to where your agency is. And so with that, I'm just simply going to select a number of these here. Each one has either 1 to 4 different descriptors of, say, for example, your business processes in design, or your business processes in operations, or in maintenance, for example. One of the observations from the last report cards is most agencies do quite well in terms of maintenance operations, which is encouraging. There's one for workforce here, and talks about workforce capabilities and improvement. One talking about organizational culture under the management administration leadership function. There's one here talking about organization and staffing, which is different than workforce. It's how one uses the workforce as opposed to the capabilities of the workforce itself. Collaboration is actually split into internal and external collaboration for each of the levels. So you can take a look at that divide. And then performance measurement, which is ultimately what goes back to the GCOST concept that Eddie was outlining earlier. And as you get to the end here, you can click complete the survey. Now, the trick is you can either walk out of this and stop right here and go off this screen, and you can come back, log back in, and complete your survey. If you actually hit complete the survey is logged, and you can't go back and edit the survey. But once you complete the survey, what it will do is it will kick out your responses for the entire survey on a page. And then what you can do is that you can print that page, and it will print it either to a printer, or you can select printing it to a PDF file, and then you can print it off later. So that is a very brief run-through for the traffic signal benchmarking self-assessment for 2018. This webinar has been recorded, and we are planning on hosting another webinar through ITE's webinar and professional development program here within the next couple of weeks. And the self-assessment is open until April 30th. The website for this is www.psbenchmarking.org, and there will be links off of the ITE homepage and the NOCOE page as well. And there is a link shown in the box in the webinar program. So with that, if you have any questions, please let us know. You're welcome to email both Eddie and I. If you go to the next slide there. And there's our contact information, and you're welcome to reach out to us. So with that, I'll pass back to Eddie if he's got any more comments, and we'll go from there.
No, I have no comments. I don't know if we have time to take a question or two, or if there are any questions. I don't see any in the chat box.
Yeah, I don't see any questions right now. I guess if nobody has questions right now, they can email it later to Eddie or Doug. Their email are shared here. So I guess let me just, if Doug and Eddie are done, so I just want to take a moment and thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We had some good information here, and we will send you a follow-up email with this recording and the slides. On behalf of National Operations Center of Excellence and our presenters, I want to thank you for joining us today and wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you.